Hi, this is Marcy Davis with Glasscaster, and I'm here in West Palm Beach with Tony Glander. How you doing?
I'm very good. I'm on a high. We just finished Glass Crafters this year with McMowell Studios and Randy Wardell, and it was a blast.
And so, what did you enjoy most about this particular event?
It's always about the people who come out. It's always like, especially this event was a very positive, upbeat, excited. And the other thing is I like the layout of it. It was all about education and knowledge, and people weren't caught up with making something. They're interested in the information they could gather and the presentations and a lot of the networking. And that was a big positive thing about the whole weekend, was how do we network efficiently and effectively.
So yeah, I enjoyed the speakers too. There was a lot of good information. And so, how did you stumble into the crazy world of art glass? What are you in for, kind of?
A friend of mine always answers that question with poor life choices, but it's not really. I mean, I got out of college and I was looking at veterinary school, and I was working for a veterinarian that I'd worked for through high school and college, and it became evident that I wasn't getting into vet school, but I had been working for 3 years for a stained glass shop. I had taken their beginner class and a couple of their other classes, and I started working for them just part-time because I enjoyed it. It was fun. And I would walk in the door, they'd give me the pattern, the glass, the materials, and I would fabricate, their panels, or I would teach a class, and I got a lot of experience, especially in the cutting and fabrication. Not so much design under them, but it became evident, and I started doing the design work on my own. And 3 years into not getting into vet school and working two part-time, or a full-time job and a part-time job, I decided I was going to get a real job, vacation pay, sick leave, all that good stuff. And I told my veterinary boss, and he understood. And I told my glass boss, and she said, well, I'm selling the studio, and you should buy it. And it was a great opportunity. It was a storefront. So buy materials, supplies, teach classes, but up front was a gallery space with our stained glass and hand-blown glass pieces. So it was a way to get people off the street into the store, and then they either got wowed with the stained glass and bought that, or the hand-blown glass and bought that, or they signed up to take a class because they wanted to do it themselves.
And so the where and the when of this project?
Of the studio?
Yeah.
Oh, where and when was 1990, January of 1990 is when I bought the studio and took it over. But the interesting thing is in 88, 89, the owner had brought in Narcissus Quagliata for a workshop. And she said, well, do you want to take this workshop? You can have half off. And I was like, I've never heard of this guy, okay, But it was amazing and so much fun to see everybody's work. And he didn't do a hands-on. He literally did an educational workshop. He talked about how he designed, he talked about how he created, he showed us, he put us through some exercises, and it was just phenomenal. It took everybody's artwork that attended from one level 10 steps up to understand how he worked and how he created, because at the time he said he wasn't an artist, that he was more of a designer. And he showed us how he designed and created his pieces, how he put the idea from his head down onto paper. And he was kind of a big influence because he was the type that was like, design first. Don't think about how you're going to do it in glass. Just design. And then you can figure out how to do it in glass, whether you fuse it or stained glass it or pull stringers out of a vitrograph, whatever. Design it so you come up with this cool piece of art, the looks of it. So once I had the store and I had enough students under my belt, I did the same thing. I started bringing in nationally known artists. And I had met Joe Percelli at a conference, in '89. And I saw him literally wake up an audience with his talk. So I knew if I was going to bring somebody in, I wanted somebody of his excitement and energy. And then through him, Peter McGrain, Nui Fagan, Dan Fenton, we just kept bringing them in and expanding each year. And it was just the energy is contagious with them. And the way, especially Peter McGrain, the way he teaches a class, he individualizes the student. And the students that say, oh, I can't draw, or they're unsure about their art's ability, he levitates. He literally picks them up and shows them that they can do art. And if you ask him, he's more proud about the student's work in his art collection than he is about any famous artist's work in his collection. He just loves that, and he doesn't, I don't think he sees the artwork, he sees that creation of an artist. He sees that unsure person, and because we've all got it, we've just forgotten it. So he takes that uncertain artist and makes them a certain artist that they can draw and that they can create, and that what they make is going to be, viable. So
I want to go back to what you said, Narcissus said about designing first and then figure out the execution of it. It's been my observation that because the material of glass, hot, warm, cold, however, it is so beautiful on its own and so seductive on its own that it's so much, there's such a temptation. I think many of us fall into this temptation, which is, let's just play, because let the material dictate it, because the material itself, how can you go wrong? It's this beautiful mistress, you know what I mean?
Well, there's so many levels of being an artist, but my favorite saying is, you get a kid a hammer and everything becomes a nail. And that's the way I felt when I'd learn a technique. I'd learn sandblasting. Well, everything's got to be sandblasted from now on, and you learn fusing. Well, now everything's got to be fused. But when you reach that level of understanding what I call a tool, when you understand fusing, and you can take that tool and put it in your toolbox, when you understand etching and you put it in your toolbox, and you keep creating those tools, then when you have a project and it's a bowl that's going to go on your table, it's a window that's going to go, or I saw a sculpture out here with dichroic glass in the middle of town square. When you get that opportunity, then I can see what he means by you create it in your head. You look at the space, you look at where it's going, and you sit there and say, this is what I want it to look like. What tools can I use to make that creation happen? So am I going to need silk screening on it? Am I going to need sandblasting, or is it going to be best to slump it? How can I take those tools and create my vision?
So in the timeline of your life, where does screen printing come up at first?
It's the funniest thing to ask me, because putting the talk together for GlassQuest, it was almost like taking a rolling pin to my brain, and it wasn't a matter of I did this first or this technique second or that third. It was a matter of one thing bouncing off another. But I do remember that when I first met Ken Leap out of New Jersey, who's a phenomenal painter, amazing artist, I went into his studio, and his studio is in kind of what you'd think of as like an adult amusement park for glass. It's got glass blowing facilities, it has a museum, it has like a candy shop, it has a beautiful glass gallery, and most people go up there, it's a destination. You go up there, you tour it, and you leave. So he has a lot of tourists that come through, and he had a panel hanging in the window, and it was one of his drawings of a man in Renaissance garb and some of hand-blown glass around the edge of that one piece of glass that the man was painted on. And it was hanging in the window for, I want to say, like $200. And I was like, there's no way you hand-painted that and you're selling it for $200.
Right.
And he laughed, and he said, no, he says, I did the drawing, and I had a screen made of it, to screen print with. So I screen print 10 at a time, I fire them, he did a little hand painting on them, and then he puts them up in the window. So when the one sells and the person leaves, he puts up the next one. So what looks like an original hand-drawn is actually a screen. It is his original drawing, but he can produce them much quicker and easier. So I went home from that, and that was probably early 90s. And I went home and I knew silk screening could be done photographically.
Or
So,
like on T-shirts.
On T-shirts, but I knew you could do lettering, I knew you could do drawings, but I also knew you could go from a photograph to a silk screen. So I went home and I started looking for people who could teach me how to produce that screen. I had already had some painting experience, so I knew I wanted to use paint to go through the screen and fire it, but I didn't know how to make the screen or how to do that properly. So luck had it that a woman that worked for me at the time knew a woman that silk screened as a business. She has a large T-shirt printing operation. And the best thing about her was she started in her garage with really, really cheap equipment. So she was able to kind of guide me at the beginning to say, you know, don't buy a $5,000 exposure table. Go get these supplies and it'll be your light table for like 50 bucks.
Right.
So it was great getting that in. We also had, whenever Peter or any other artist came to town for a conference, we'd get T-shirts printed up. So I was able to go to that company and get some advice and some help with at times. So, I mean, my career is based on the kindness and generosity of other teachers and other people being very free and you know, generous with their information.
And so your screen printing life includes like things like awards and elements in maybe stained glass panels and also in some blown work as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about how this occurs?
It's kind of an addiction. I mean, you play with it. For me, it started with stained glass because when I was, again, this was early in stained glass for me, so when I saw faces done in stained glass, they always looked odd, you know, if they were just stained glass, until you hit Narcissus. And then these faces are just phenomenal, you know. So that kind of inspired me. But when, you know, looking to do the work I did, I started sandblasting on flash glass. And Patrick Nagel is a very graphic artist with women's faces. Very simple lines. So I could sandblast flash glass to get the imagery that I wanted because it was so stark and so crisp. But then I kind of wanted more. I wanted more of that photographic technique. So I had an idea about photographing my wife and using her image. And so we did that. And I didn't know how to traditionally glass paint very well, and probably still don't, but how to get mattes and tone. But I could sandblast very well. So I screen printed her face on flash glass, got the stark photograph, but then I was able to sandblast the back of the glass very soft and create tones and shades and highlights in that flash glass to carry off the face.
Right.
So, but then I incorporated around that, almost like Narcissus, but not like Narcissus, but almost like Narcissus, in using some just beautiful hand-blown Lamberts, you know, around it. And that's what really, I mean, the beauty of my wife really helps, but the beauty of the Lamberts really pop that panel, because the only piece that's screen printed in that is her face. Everything else is the beauty of those Lambert glasses. They're really gorgeous.
And so what about using the screens as roll-ups?
Roll-ups, what an addiction. Early on, I met some glass-blowing artists called the Art of Fire. And from my original meeting to now, they had moved to a farm. They bought an old farm, they had an old barn, they fixed up into one of the best hot shops on the East Coast. Just phenomenal. And the people that work there really, really push themselves to know modern techniques and really cool things. Their glass blowing is just phenomenal. They brought in, kind of like me learning from Narcissus, they brought in really incredible glass blowers to learn from, and they traveled and all. So when I walked in and I had heard of what a roll-up was and what I understood it to be, and I approached them on doing it with one of my pieces, Josh, the one guy there, you know, right away he was like, well, he says, I wouldn't do it that way. He says, I would do it this way. And he did it a totally different way than the traditional fused glass roll-up was done.
Do you want to explain for our listeners, in case they're not familiar, what that is?
So a traditional roll-up, when you talk about fused glass, is you create a rectangular or square piece of glass, And the glassblower makes a disc that when they heat up your square or rectangle and they roll it up, that disc fits the bottom of that cylinder. Okay? So, and that cylinder, that disc, they do it on the bottom of a blowpipe. So once they roll that, your square or rectangle up, they heat it, they seal it up, and then they close off the other end. So they've created basically a balloon. And they can take your pattern and increase it, enlarge it, blow it out to whatever shape they want, pinch off the end, transfer it to a punny rod, which doesn't have a hole down the middle, and create a bowl or a pitcher or whatever kind of glass art you want that has your pattern in it. So for me, what they saw and how they approached it was more of, they started with a bubble, and they rolled my piece on top of that bubble.
Right.
And that became the piece to blow out, which with clear glass that I fused on, or the cathedral glass, it might have had a color, that put a skin of white inside of that vase. And it gave a distance between my screen printed image and that white level. So it gave a little bit of shadow from my image onto the white, which was incredible.
Really
some
nice
depth. Yeah. So, and we did some paperweights also. So I gave them some of my trees that I do. And we started with just encasing them. And then before they encased them on one, they took the flat piece of glass and twisted it up. So it looked like the branches of the tree were blowing in the wind. And then they encased it.
Wow.
So when you look in that paperweight, it's swirled all around. And again, I had taken a number of glassblowing classes, but I knew I didn't have the skills to pull off what I wanted. And to hand it off to a professional who's not just a professional, but a true craftsman artist who can, not only see your vision, but say, hey, I see a vision in this too. Maybe we should do this, or maybe we should do that. And it's a true collaboration, because you got to give that craftsman, that expert, some range to play with it and do what he thinks could be really cool. So. And
so the guy you went to down the street, was he doing it in this way, or you said he was different than the usual way, in the way that he handled it?
He'll do it the traditional way, where you can just roll up that piece of glass that you have. Or he'll do it where he does it on a bubble and puts it on the outside of the bubble. So the next one I'm taking him is it's like a strip plate, where we cut strips of glass, put them up on edge, and we fuse them together. But the top of the strips, it's a new kind of thing that's going around now, but the top of the strip isn't cut perfectly straight. It's very irregular. So when you initially fuse them together, those tops of those strips fold over and bend over all different ways. So you get this real, and this is for a company that the zebra is their logo. So I fused black, whites, and clears all together.
Very dramatic.
Yeah. So, but when I was talking to the glassblower about it, he said to take that square and have two of the edges that are going to roll up together, beveled, so that when they come together flat. So we've had that done. I've got the piece. I just have to get the time to get up to the glassblower to have them roll that up.
Well, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, so the screen printing is now, you've got it in all different ways of what you do with it. And now you've got something totally, and never something completely different, as they say. You've got something totally different with the Shatterglass, which I find fabulously exciting. And did you originate this? Can you tell us about this, please? It's so totally different than the screen printing. How do you get there?
I can't even imagine anyone saying they originated, and especially me, because I'm so influenced by so many artists. Bob Patterson is an artist down in Houston, Texas, and he would have me come down and teach. And I feel like I walked out of that studio with so many great ideas and so many directions to go in. And one of the directions is he would do a class called Fire and Ice. And so if you were in the class, you would come in the first day and you would work with a welder. Half the students would work with a welder, and they would make a table base.
Okay.
Okay, the other half of the students are in the studio creating a tabletop out of plate glass. They're recycling, glass that people are throwing away, window glass, regular window glass. And he's having them just play, break the piece, do this. But they're making two, like, I forget if they were about 18 inches or 24 inches square slabs of really cool, fun stuff. And I got home soon after one of his, teaching down there, and the facility I'm in took all the display case doors off their displays. They wanted people to be able to reach in and grab the art. And they asked me very kindly, because I have a truck, can you take those to the dump? Well, they're tempered glass, and you can't do anything with tempered glass except break it.
Right.
So I wrapped it up in some newspaper and I broke it. And,
with a hammer?
I think I did with a hammer with the first one. I've gone to mosaic nippers, which are much more effective, much quicker. But I popped it, and it was very interesting. I liked it. And I looked at one of my molds that was very steep. The edges came up very sharp. And I thought, because when tempered breaks, it doesn't break like frit. It breaks like little boxes. So I thought, if I could stack up those boxes along the side of that mold, and I could fire it just till it tacks together, that would be really cool. So I just experimented. I tried it, and it worked. So then we tried a couple more, we tried the same thing at different temperatures. The COE of plate is down around 82. So your firing cycles are all different.
Right.
So if you overfire this, it's going to end up at the bottom of your mold. If you fire it just right, it still looks like broken tempered. That's just stuck together. If you fire it a little more, you smooth off the edges, and it becomes this really incredible piece. So, so it just became a fun thing to do, to be able to see if we could do that. So I made a number of just tempered bowls. And then I thought, well, this is neat, but you got to take it further. And Phil Teefey is a glass artist up in the Northwest. Again, very influential. And one of his marketing talks, he said, if you're going to make something to sell, he said, make 100 of them. He says, then you'll figure out all the problems. You'll change your design, you'll change the colors, you'll change things a little bit each time until you have this perfected thing. And you'll know what your costs are to sell it. So I like that, and so I decided I was going to make 50 of these bowls, and I was going to try different things each time. So we started putting in fiberboard to leave gaps, holes, kind of in the bowl, so that we could insert regular art glass after it was cold. So after it had fired, after it attacked, then we'd pop out the fiberboard, and we'd cold fuse, also known as gluing. We'd glue in a piece of art glass, either a cast head or just some cool spirit glass or some funky bullseye, we just play. And then I found out the Yakagani glass had glass that was compatible with plate. So I got some of that sheet glass, some of the frits, and we had a ball playing with that.
So now you had color.
Now I had color in with the tempered. I could fuse to it. And then we found out that on that one really steep mold, if we created, instead of filling up that whole mold, if we created fingers almost of the tempered coming out, they would tack fuse together, and then if we put that bowl back in the kiln without the mold, those fingers would bend down if we heated it just right. So I love, a lot of people learn how to fuse and how to slump, and that's their two tools. And when you start playing, you realize that temperatures between 1050 and 1500 there's more tools within that range. Every temperature is a range, and every temperature is a different effect on what you're trying to do, whether you've already fused the piece and you're slumping it, or if you're just tack fusing it or whatever. You've got all these different temperatures to do all these different things. So creating the 50 bowls was just incredible. It just one play after the other, and then I started using art glass, because could you stack up art glass and get the same effect in one firing?
Could you?
Yeah, the black and white bowl that we had here this weekend was one fire. So instead of, and that was the other thing, is I never slumped the tempered glass bowls. They were what I call one fire bowls. You stack that up, you fire it, you're done.
Yeah.
It's already in that shape. You created it in that mold, in that shape.
I love them so much because, first of all, the sparkle of the light that goes through, because it's all crackly. And then, you know, you want to touch it, you think it might be sharp, but it isn't, but it has this wonderful texture. And then, of course, if you know anything about glass, it's like, how on earth did you get that into, you know, you can't have a mold like that, and there's no lip on it, and it's like, wait, what? And so, and of course, it's, you know, the sort of repurpose, reuse, recycle thing, plus not to mention that it's available and it's pretty much free. So there's so many things to recommend it as something to play with.
Well, and the funniest thing was I walked into a studio and they had Bullseye's mold. They came up with a series of molds that you would use to first bend the glass very subtle, second mold to bend it more, and then the third mold you get really steep sides out of it. But all I saw was number 3.
Right.
Very steep sides, and I just fell in love. I was just like, that's the mold I need. It's got the perfect sides, it's up high, and I can stack that tempered right on up the sides. And I asked him to buy that mold, and the person behind the counter said, no, you need all 3 to be out. And I said, no, I just need that one.
Right.
And but now I have all 3, and I've used all 3 for that same technique, because the coolest thing about number 1 and number 2 is they're what they call ball molds. There is no flat spot. It's all curved, so the weight from the top upper edge is pushing down to the center.
Right.
It's all weighted that way, so everything tacks together. And they're beautiful. They're beautiful molds because they create the beautiful glass shapes. They're very exquisite shapes.
So 2 questions. One, you know, ceramic molds versus metal, stainless steel molds, let's say. Is one possible, one not, or are they both fine, or it's all the same?
Again, you're asking me to take a tool out of my toolbox. You know, if I need to, I use a metal mold. If I've got a ceramic mold, if I'm firing over versus inside. So yeah, I use both.
And what about separator? Is it, you know, the kiln wash? I mean, like how?
The coolest thing that I found, and the first time we got the 3 molds and I tried playing with it, one of my students wanted to play with it. So he cut this gorgeous piece of Bullseye, and we full fired it, you know, with another piece on top, and we put it through the first mold. With the first mold is very simple. It's just a very subtle bend to it. Beautiful. We kiln washed and prepped the next mold, and we put it on that, and it kind of collapsed into, didn't really take on the shape. It's a pretty steep drop.
Right.
And we came out with what we call Darth Vader's helmet.
Right.
It was terrible. It was bad because it was such a beautiful piece of glass, and I thought, what an idiot. You know, and I went back to the drawing board and I said, we've got to start with a piece of glass. So I owned a stained glass store for 12 years. We've got a lot of art glass that's sitting around, and any art glass is compatible to itself. So you don't have to experiment or try things with fusible glass, 90 or 96. You can take a sheet of any art glass and fuse it back to itself, and it's compatible. So that's what we did. We took some scrap art glass, we fused it back to itself, the same size as the Bullseye disc we did. We slumped it in the first one. We got to the second one, and the idea is that there's a long, long soak at 1200 degrees. To get that to go down into, you're not just slumping to it, you're dropping it down into, you're asking the glass to actually compress and squeeze and drop down into that bowl. So it's kind of unconventional, but we kiln washed the mold. And then what we did is use the boron, which someone explained to me is kind of like mini ball bearings.
Okay.
It kind of helps move things. So we sprayed on top of the kiln wash gently.
Oh, you're not allowed to do that.
Well, there was no police in my studio at the time. So we just kind of sprayed that top shoulder of that mold where the glass is resting to get it to kind of slide down and help encourage that glass to drop smoothly down to the bottom. And that was the big ticket. That first experimental piece that we did dropped down, and we did the same thing with number 3, and every time it's worked. The boron, you gotta be careful, because if you oversaturate it, it'll soak into your mold and you can't use kiln wash. But if you lightly apply it to a kiln wash, then it acts really well, and it just helped drop those glasses down into the mold.
You're bending my mind, you know, with this suggestion. It's like, wait, but then why not just use the boron? Why use the combination of the two? Would they fall down into a puddle in the bottom? It's too much of that?
No, because I'm a cheap bastard. Anybody who knows me will tell you he's a cheap bastard. So the boron's on the expensive side, and to get to do what we wanted it to do, we didn't need the whole thing. That the kiln wash is very cheap. We can kiln wash it, and again, using kiln. I shouldn't say it's cheap, because you want to use the best that's out there. Don't use just a generic kiln wash. Get a really good kiln wash, and then back it up with you're just backing it up with the boron. You're just putting a couple of those ball bearings around the top, and that you can use. You'll get so much more out of that can if you're just touching it up, in a sense.
It's like a Teflon cake pan.
Yeah. The other thing is that we started with these flat molds of like Green Man and the Tree of Life, and there's the Koi Pond, and they're flat clay molds with these impressions sticking out of them. And we'll cast a piece of glass, again, any glass we want off our shelf. It doesn't have to be compatible, or it has to be compatible, sorry. It doesn't have to be 90 or 96, it can be any glass. All we're doing is making a mold, almost a casting of that mold. Because what I wanted was a three-dimensional fish. I didn't want the impression of a fish. I wanted a three-dimensional fish, so I cast a piece of glass on that, took it off, sprayed it with the boron, because the kiln wash wouldn't really, I don't think it would really work well with that effect. But I used the boron to create a separator, and I filled that mold, it's a glass mold now, with frit. And I fired it just till it tack fused. So I'm tack fusing frit together in a glass mold. And then you pop that three-dimensional fish out of that mold, and you can use that on top of something. And to me, that was, like you said, mind-bending.
Your mind goes in fascinating directions.
Some would say that.
Speaking of your mind going in fascinating directions, so do you teach? Can you share your visions with the world? I mean,
I'm trying. I think again, to say I teach, it's kind of fun to think about, because I enjoy the time just talking to anybody else who appreciates glass. So to be hired even this weekend to come down here to Florida and to spend a weekend teaching with other glass people that just love it, and I don't feel I'm any better or more artistic or anything than these students. I mean, some of these people had their artwork out here, this weekend, and it was mind-blowing. It was just incredible pieces already. What do they need me to teach them, So it was just a great time. But I have a studio just outside of DC in Gaithersburg that we teach at. So we run little short 2-hour workshops. We run full-day workshops. We'll do kids' classes with fused glass that I love to do, because kids are so uninhibited, and they have a good time. I also teach up at a studio that's local to us, Anything in Stained Glass. So they're close by, and they do great marketing, and we can teach there. I travel a lot, like the gig this weekend, coming down here to Florida and going to a personal studio, and teaching there. As I mentioned, Houston, we taught there. About a month or 4 ago, I taught down at Hollanders in Atlanta. So I'll travel and teach, and then the webinars that have been going on through Glass Patterns and Glass Art are just phenomenal, because I can sit in my living room, talk to people, and it's not just people in one location. It's people in Israel or Australia or South America or wherever, and I teach for 2 hours, and the questions that I was thinking it was going to be very strange not to be able to interact with the students, but during the webinars you do. They type in questions, and by the question you get a feel for where the person's at with their work and what they're trying to accomplish, and you can start that interaction. And so the webinars aren't as, I was kind of worried they were going to be cold, but they aren't. They're very interactive and they're fun. And I can do it from my living room. There's no traveling, there's nothing. The only problem is we have barking dogs occasionally in the back that you have to quiet.
The thing that, I mean, for me as a producer, what I wanted to go for and what you with your personality absolutely, dovetail and help create, which is I kind of wanted to be that not only are you sitting in your living room, but they're sitting home in their jammies, having a cup of tea, and you are their new virtual best friend, as opposed to feel warm and fuzzy, like they can ask you anything and they feel like they have access to you, and almost like a one-on-one, except not. And I think that gets accomplished. And
and that only comes through because of the instructors I've met. Peter McGrain is probably the best teacher out there, the way he elevates the student. Joe Percelli, the way he talks with his hands, and he teaches. Just all the teachers, the way they are so generous with their information and their personalities, and to see how the student responds to that, it's such a neat environment.
So what are we going to see from you in the near future? You got anything on the horizon?
It's hard to say because my daughter's graduating from high school and off to college in a few months, and my family to me is it's one of the reasons I'm so successful. I think it's if you've got a base of that, you can do anything. So so I want to spend some time there, but and my son, same thing. He's getting older day by day, and he's going to be off pretty soon to college. So. And my wife is just phenomenal herself. So I want to spend the summer with a lot of that, but I still consider myself a very strong stained glass artist, and I love it. And we've got a job that we've got to get done, that I love the design. I love the glasses we picked. We had the help of an artist by the name of Charles Duvalier, who went to college for stained glass, went to Germany to study it, and then his career was doing graphics for the Air Force, and he's almost ready to retire, and he's still an excited stained glass artist designer who does phenomenal work. So I want to collaborate, I think, a little more with him. I want to push more of the stained glass in more interesting directions, and I want to take advantage of more technology, LEDs, seeing how that can play out in etched glass, tempered glass, any kind of art glass work. So I'm also looking more outside of the glass realm. Just like we're trying to get other artists to come look at glass, I'm trying to get out and look, and I've created this really cool slideshow, mostly for myself. And it's based off a picture I saw where a photographer he did a series called Water Wigs. And he photographed bald people with water balloons on their head that he would capture the instant they popped. And it would look like the person had water hair. The hair was water. And he used, one was a biker that had the balloon going down the middle of his head like a mohawk. And the lighting was so brilliant, almost like a Peter McGrain coloration of somebody's, face and background. And the expressions on the people's faces. And the people's face, I love people's faces. I went to Peru and I photographed people's faces. They intrigued me. So I think, and there's another guy doing marine sculptures of the human form down in the islands and sinking them. And what those sculptures do is create reefs. The fish come to them, the coral grow on them, but they're interesting sculptures on their own. But they evolve, and they're a piece of artwork. To me, it's a brilliance because it's a piece of artwork that's gonna evolve over time. You put it down there, and people will go scuba dive and see it today. But you go back in a year, and it's gonna look completely different. You go back in 10 years, you may not even see the sculpture. But that evolution, to me, we make a stained glass window and you come back 100 years from now and it looks like a stained glass window. But that brilliance to see it evolve is something I think is just wild. So that slideshow to me invigorates me, and I pull it out of that's another tool in my toolbox. I pull out when I need inspiration. I say, being here in West Palm Beach, and there's murals on every building, and they're not just simple murals, they're mural, and the coolest thing about them is they get painted over every year, and a new mural goes up. So I mean, to have, again, it's an evolution, it's a cycle, and to be just inspired that way day to day, to me, is just
evolving and
yeah.
fresh. Well, I know that if anyone wants to learn from you via one of your webinars, they can find the information at glasspatterns.com. But if somebody wants to contact you directly or sign up for one of your in-person live classes, how do they reach you?
Best way is go through the website, which is, it's a long one, but it's Fitzpatrick Glass Studios, all one word, .com. So Fitzpatrick was my grandmother's maiden name, and that's why I adopted that for our studio name, but Fitzpatrick Glass Studios. They can get all the contact information there, or they can send me an email to Tony at fitzpatrickglass.com.
Okay,
So.
Fitzpatrick Glass and not studios?
No studios on the email.
See,
Yep.
I'm glad we had this little bit of clarification.
Very important.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been inspiring and exciting, and we're glad that you enjoyed your weekend in Florida.
My pleasure.
This is Marcy Davis with Glasscaster. See you next time.